Wow, I didn't even have to say anything and you quieted down like very good students. Thank you very much. Good afternoon, and thank you all for being here. I'm Margaret Spellings, President and CEO of the Bipartisan Policy Center, and it is my pleasure to welcome you here today to learn about Microsoft's plans to help combat abusive AI-generated content. First, I'd like to thank the team at Microsoft for partnering with us on this event and extend gratitude to Senator Amy Klobuchar, Representative Laurel Lee, Brad Smith, Vice Chair and President of Microsoft, Michelle DeLaune, President and CEO of the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, otherwise known as NCMEC, and Alexandra Reeve Givens, President and CEO of the Center for Democracy and Technology, for participating in this important event. Government leaders at the state and federal level, like those here with us today, have worked hard to find ways to safeguard rapidly advancing AI. And Microsoft is leading the way by using their brightest minds to identify how to address the potential threats of this ever-changing technology and what it could mean for our society, our democracy, our financial institutions, and our families. At BPC, our policy experts have also been thinking about the implications new technologies have on policymaking and governance. For example, this spring, we launched an initiative educating Hill staff on the basics of AI as they consider legislative action and the way forward. To speak to us about how the Senate is thinking about this, it's my pleasure to introduce Senator Amy Klobuchar from Minnesota. She has been a champion of bipartisanship since she arrived in the Senate in 2006, and we admire and thank her. She led the effort to pass landmark legislation to end human trafficking and combat fentanyl and the overdose crisis. She fought to pass the most significant consumer product safety legislation in a generation, keeping foreign toxic products off our shores and out of our stores, and pushed cell phone companies to enact more consumer-friendly policies. In addition to her role on the Judiciary Committee, Senator Klobuchar's bipartisan bill on digital markets became the first piece of antitrust tech legislation to pass that committee since the advent of the internet. She has been a fierce defender of consumers as technology continues to evolve ahead of our ability to regulate it. And we can see this through her introduction of the SHIELD Act, which would provide federal law enforcement with the tools they need to crack down on serious privacy violations. And she's also a co-sponsor of COSA on the Senate floor today. Please join me in welcoming Senator Klobuchar. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Margaret. It's great to be here with all of you. As you know, I come from the state of Minnesota, a place where the women are strong, the men are good looking, and all the bipartisanship is above average. So we try hard, and I want to thank the other panelists. I'm sort of turn into a pumpkin as we're actually going back and getting COSA and all these other bills passed this week in the Senate. We're pretty excited about this, that we're finally starting to move ahead on some of the kids' issues, at least when it comes to the internet. Congresswoman Lee, thank you for being here. Brad, who I know is going to be following me up here on the podium. Alex, Michelle, thank you for your work with the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. As you know, Patty Wetterling, someone a long advocate after losing her son Jacob in a horrible abduction, not knowing where he was for decades, is a very, very good friend of mine, and I appreciate the work that you've done. So I think we all know AI is the future, and I think David Brooks said it best when in one of his columns he wrote, "The people in AI seem to be experiencing radically different brain states all at once. I found it incredibly hard to write about AI," he said, "because it is literally unknowable whether this technology is leading us to heaven or hell." This is going to be on us of whether it leads us to heaven or hell. Coming from the state that produced everything from the pacemaker to the Post-it note and the home of Mayo Clinic, I do see these incredible opportunities in front of us. I've talked to a number of our leaders in the business community and in healthcare especially, and seeing these opportunities. But if we don't put guardrails in place, when you have someone like Elon Musk saying he wants to see regulations, maybe we should listen, because we need to put some rules in place. And I've been honored to work with Senator Schumer and Senator Rounds and Young and Senator Heinrich on the work that we've been doing in the Senate. As you know, this bipartisan framework emerged, and from there we must pass legislation. And if it's not enough that we're getting some of the kids' privacy work done this week, we actually, in the Commerce Committee this week, are marking up a number of the bills, including one of them I'm going to discuss that I have with Senator Thune. So what do we see on the kind of bad side of the ledger? Well, we know that we're seeing more and more deepfakes, especially involving porn. And one of the alarming consequences of this is that Americans, especially women and girls, are now more vulnerable than ever to the non-consensual online distribution of intimate images, also known as revenge porn. In 2016, 1 in 25 Americans reported being threatened to be a victim of revenge porn. Now that's 1 in 8. Yet there's no real federal statute that's useful for the Justice Department in pursuing these cases. Very few of them were brought. That's why Senator Cornyn and I, we do a lot of work together on the Judiciary Committee, came together and introduced the SHIELD Act that just recently passed the Senate. We got it through a number of obstacles. That's a euphemism for some of my colleagues. But we know that this proliferation of AI-generated deepfakes, where you can't tell if it's the real person or not, our bill was on the real person, which is, of course, number one thing you have to tackle. When also involving kids that are looking for a boyfriend or girlfriend, they send the photo of themselves in, then they're either threatened, and we've seen Christopher Wray testified over 24 suicides just last year. Because of this type of activity. You think of the 14-year-old girl in Texas whose classmates, we now go to the next step, which is using the images with AI, which adds a whole new layer to this. And that's what the Defiance bill, a second bill that just passed the Senate, was about, the Defiant bill. There's the story of the 14-year-old girl in Texas whose classmates used AI to create and share fake nude photos of her. As her mom said, her innocence was shattered and her eyes were open to the reality of how cruel a person can be. The terrible story out of Long Island, where a man made and posted deepfake pornography of his former high school classmates. Law enforcement brought him to justice, but as the DA in the case said, the only reason he's serving time is because investigators found one image of an underage girl that he'd used in one of the deepfakes. So they looked, and that was their hook to be able to bring the case, something that I used to do as a prosecutor way back before any of this was available. When you found one of those images, you actually had a case to make. But that means that the other pornographic deepfakes didn't technically break the law. If we don't act now, we're going to hear more stories like these. Earlier this year, a third bill, Senator Ted Cruz and I, just in case anyone was falling asleep, but Senator Ted Cruz and I introduced a bill to tackle deepfake revenge porn head-on. Does two main things: makes the publication or threat of publication of revenge porn, real or deepfake, a federal crime. And secondly, it requires the social media platforms to take down deepfake revenge porn within 2 days of being notified by the victim. So I think it's a practical approach to this. Our bill does this all while protecting the constitutional right to free speech, because this isn't about limiting self-expression, it's about protecting privacy. The proliferation of deepfakes, pornographic and otherwise, is one example of why we must act. You're also aware of the protection of intellectual property. That's why Senator Coons, Blackburn, Tillis, we have come together on this No Fakes Act to create a private right of action to obtain statutory and civil damages. Continuing to work with our colleagues. That's a broader approach when you look at outside of the pornographic problems and the democracy issues in some of the protections that have to be in place. We're going to have to be doing more on scams. My own state director's son is in the Marines, and her husband got a call one day that was her son's voice. They had scraped it off the internet and called and said, "I'm in trouble, Dad, I'm in trouble." he happened to know was pretty savvy, unlike maybe a grandma that's going to be not know what's going on and believe this. He figured it wasn't his son because he was deployed on some secret mission that they didn't even know about. And he said, who are you? Who are you? And then the person just hung up. But imagine that happening, and it's happening a lot with people who are in the military. It's happening a lot with seniors as well. But the one thing I wanted to end with, because it is so relevant today as we're heading, if you notice, there's an election season going on. I don't know if anyone noticed. There's just been a few things happening. But as chair of the Senate Rules Committee, one of my jobs is focusing on elections and making sure elections are protected. When Senator Blunt was in the Senate, now I work with Senator Fisher, very good working relationship, but Senator Blunt and I made sure we had funding to all of our local election offices to prevent cyber attacks. And we've actually, as you know, election through election since the election back in 2016, have been able to show safety in our elections, regardless of actually what political party was running the government. The other thing we were focused on is the Electoral College, and as you know, we changed that on a bipartisan basis, how that law worked with Senator Collins and Senator Manchin. And now we have this deep fake in political, not just ads, but videos and robocalls. And we're really worried about this. So there's 2 bills that I asked you to look at. There's a third one on giving assistance, which isn't very controversial, assistance to the Election Assistance Commission that we got through in a bipartisan vote. The other 2 bills, I'm going to be asking to have a vote on them this week in the Senate, most likely tomorrow. I don't know if it's a first foray on the floor that it will be successful immediately. One bill is with Senator Murkowski. And what that bill says is, hey, if you are going to put AI altered material on there that you have to say prepared for by AI or altered or whatever the words are in the thing. This has actually happened now in 18 states, including states like Mississippi, states like Utah. Some very red states have done this because they realize you can't have democracy if people don't understand if what they're watching or listening to in a robocall are real or not. The second bill, and that's a bill with Senator Murkowski. The second bill is a bill I have, again, if you're going to fall asleep, with Josh Hawley. So that bill that Josh and I have, along with Susan Collins and many others, and that bill is broadly supported on the Democratic side, is having some issues on the Republican side, would ban deepfake. Ban deepfakes on robocalls. And of course, you got to have an exemption for parody, which is a lot of, that has to be allowed under the Constitution, and exemptions for other things. But it would basically say, as the state of Texas has done and the state of Minnesota has done, it bans these deepfake political ads. I've appreciated the support of a number of the platforms, including Microsoft, OpenAI, including IBM, and just a number of nonprofits involved in this have supported this, as a number of the platforms, because it basically says that the platforms have to take this stuff down, and then it allows a right of action from the person who is the victim of the deepfake, like when President Biden's voice was used as a fake in New Hampshire to tell people they shouldn't vote. That's being handled by the Republican Attorney General right now, brought a case in New Hampshire. But for instance, that would allow the candidate, no matter what party they are, to go after who actually produced the ad, right? In this case, a magician was involved. They should have hired a mime because the magician did an interview. But the point of it is that we're going to see more and more of this. So it's going to be an escalation of this if we don't put some simple guardrails in place. I think many of the platforms, Meta and the like, are going to come up with their own rules. They better be, everyone should be consistent in how they do this. I think that's really good. But I do think it is much better if we have a federal law in place. We have adjusted our laws all the time when new technology have come in place in many areas. And we don't just say, hey, this is happening, we're going to let our democracy, let's see how it works. We can't do that. And that's why I appreciate that we have support across the aisle for the bill. And I'm hopeful that we can keep it moving and finally get it passed, or at least get the labeling bill passed, which is what you've seen in some of these other conservative states for their own state advertising. So those are the things that we're working on literally as we speak, as I'm going to go back there right now into Fun Town and try to get some of these things done. But I just want to end by saying how, as I started, there's some great possibilities with this, but we're going to blow those possibilities, and this is what I want to convince my colleagues of, if we don't put some guardrails in place, because then the bad will overcome the good. And that's why Thune and I have this bill to set some minimum standards for non-defense uses of AI that's coming up tomorrow, a number of other things. We're going to have to start passing these through the committees, put them together in the package. The Speaker of the House has shown some interest in this topic because I've talked to him personally, and we need to just get some guardrails in place. We can always add fancy things later, but I will say that the porn and some of the really bad stuff that hurts people, and then on another side, the democracy piece of it is sort of hair on fire. And that's why you see us starting to try to move on this now, and appreciate the support for everyone from your very different perspectives for the future of our country in moving ahead on this. So with that, I want to thank Brad Smith, by the way, for being part of this today, being willing to come forward in some very difficult times on the technology front, and Microsoft support for some of these bills that have been mentioned today, as well as other platform support, has made a huge amount of difference in trying to get these through. Because, you know, people can just put their head in the sand and hope, hey, I'm going to go ahead and hope it works and that no one will ever regulate me. That's not going to work in this area of AI. So we've got to get ahead of it. And I know he's going to talk about the work that they're doing, an announcement they're making today. As you know, he is the vice chair and president. Microsoft leads a team of over 1,500 business, legal, and corporate affairs people located in 54 countries and operating in 120 nations. So with that, I turn it over to Microsoft's vice chair and president, Brad Smith. Thank you. Okay.
Well, first of all, Senator Klobuchar, thank you for coming, and good luck back in Funtown. I'm sure it'll be fun. Hopefully it'll be productive as well. Margaret, thank you. She greeted me and said, thank you for coming, and I said, thank you, and thank you for existing. Because this issue, I think, is a great example of how we need to come together on a bipartisan basis. I first just want to acknowledge the extraordinary group of people here in this room. It is really an extraordinary group of people who are leading great companies, great trade associations, great civil society and nonprofit organizations, people who are doing important things in government. This is, I think, an issue and an opportunity that really compels us to come together. In some ways, the origin for today began in a meeting we had at Microsoft 2 weeks before Christmas last year. We looked back at 2023 and we looked at all of the issues relating to AI, and of course there were so many exciting developments. The generative AI era really began on November 22nd, 2022, when OpenAI, represented here today, released ChatGPT. But there was also a lot of discussion last year about the problems that could arise, especially deep fakes. And we looked at each other around the room and we said, 2023 was a year with a lot of talk on deep fakes and not much action. We resolved that, working with others, we needed to make 2024 a different year, a year where deeds would start to catch up with words. And thanks, I think, to a lot of great work from a lot of terrific people and different organizations, we're approaching the end of the 7th month of the year, and 2024 has been a different year. And it can be a different year. And it can set us on a course for a stronger second half of this decade to address these issues. And that's what we want to spend a little bit of time talking about today. I think it starts always to spend a little bit of time talking about the problem, which I will, a little bit about what we at Microsoft are doing, but here we are with an opportunity to talk about opportunities for bipartisan legislation. And that's where I want to conclude. I find the problem to be sobering because fundamentally we're talking about new technology, but the problems fundamentally are about human nature, and they are as old as civilization. As soon as people invented paper currency, other people invented counterfeiting. When Benjamin Franklin created the mail system in the United States, criminals invented mail fraud. When the telegram made it possible to send a message, along came wire fraud. When you really look back at this aspect of human nature, you find that fundamentally 3 types of activity are pursued. The first is criminals exploit technology to make money. The second is people use it to try to seize power. And if power is determined by an election in a democracy, they can seek to abuse this technology to change or impact the result of an election. And third, in some ways, I think most disturbing of all, people use technology at times to engage in unspeakable acts of cruelty. Cruelty to the youngest in society, literally starting with infants and children, something that gave birth to NCMEC, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. They use technology to exploit senior citizens, sometimes to extract their money, sometimes out of acts of cruelty, something that the AARP has helped us address. Increasingly, we've seen people use technology to abuse women and girls. And I would like to believe, and in fact I do believe, that human nature has advanced in the last 33 centuries since the invention of currency, but not uniformly. And unless good people and good companies and good institutions and good governments come together to fight these problems, we'll see a new generation of technology used to hold human beings back. That is fundamentally what I think this conversation and this opportunity for action is and needs to be about. Now, it is about generative AI. It is about deep fakes. It is about the use now for people to take advantage of AI to create video, images or imagery, and voice. And if you've come to this today, if you're watching online, you've almost certainly heard of the evolution of deep fakes. It didn't start in 2023. We started to see it in the middle of the last decade, fundamentally using AI to take someone's voice or their image or a video and create a fraudulent copy that is no longer the person that you think it is. It puts words in people's mouths even though those words were never spoken. It puts people in certain places they never visited. It shows them doing things they never did. At its heart, it is the use of deepfakes to deceive other people for financial gain, the essence of fraud, or to disrupt an election or to abuse the rights of others. And as the technology advances, so too does the ability to create images that look real, to create voices that sound genuine, increasingly in our future, to create video that will be confusing and deceptive to the vast majority of people. Indeed, already we're seeing a proliferation of deepfakes on the internet. Deepfake videos are growing at an exponential rate, and you're seeing it in the headlines of the day, as news media quite rightly is focusing on the problems that can result. One of the interesting things about this is I think most people quite rightly start out by saying, I can tell the difference. If it's my daughter, I know my daughter, and if it's her face or her video or her voice, I will always be able to tell the difference. That is not the case. In fact, study after study has shown that if you can get 60% of it right, you are not only at the top of the class, you're at the top of the country. We've created a game to let people experience this. It's called realornotquiz.com. You can go there yourself. You can go through 15 images. We give this to our best data scientists straight out of a computer science PhD. They are confident when they start that they are going to ace this test. And typically they find out that if a 60 is needed to pass, if they pass by the skin of their teeth, it's the best they'll be able to do. That is how good the technology has become. And so what we're seeing now is people losing their money at a growing rate, basically by people imposing, and as individuals, they're not. We're seeing adults vulnerable to voice cloning, especially when anyone can get an off-the-shelf, even open source program, and with as little as 8 seconds of someone's voice, use a generative AI application to create what seems like a perfect clone. And as with everything on the internet, the future is about video. And right now, again, 50%, which is the same as flipping a coin, is about the best that one can ever get. This, unfortunately, is making, I think, one of the worst problems that the internet ever exacerbated, the abuse of children and the exploitation of children, more serious still. So we need to come together, and we need to take action. And I think this is the type of thing where we have opportunities to act as individual companies, and we and many other companies are. There are great companies across the tech sector doing great things. We need to come together as a group of companies and with others. This is the type of thing where CDT and other groups are playing leading roles, and we need laws as well. At Microsoft, we sat down early in the year and we devised what we thought of as a 6-part strategy where we're spending our energy. And let me just walk through it briefly, not so much to tell you about what we're doing, although I do feel good about it, but because I think it is representative of what many tech companies are doing and what even more tech companies can do in the future. I think it starts on the left with building a strong safety architecture. When you are in the business of providing a reputable product, when you're creating tools that people can use, harnessing the power of AI to create imagery, to create a video, to include voice, we need a strong safety architecture. This is where our Office of Responsible AI and engineers across Microsoft have come together. We work with OpenAI. It starts when OpenAI is training and testing models. It then comes into the applications layer, typically at Microsoft, and it really requires, as we are finding on an ongoing basis, that we build in place the kind of architecture that will prevent these kinds of abuses. The second thing that we need to do is continue to advance the state of the art for genuine content through so-called provenance and watermarking. This is where a company like Adobe has long been a leader, where the industry has come together, where Microsoft has partnered not only with Adobe, but IBM, the BBC, and others with C2PA, what has really taken off as an industry-wide standard. And it connects with that first pillar, so that when people use products to create something with AI, there is the kind of embedded watermark that tells people this is not the real thing, this was AI generated. That, I think, is one of the critical steps we need to advance. The third step is really to then focus on safeguarding our services from this kind of conduct. How do we do that? Well, it really involves identifying abusive content. It identifies giving people the opportunity to report abusive content, and then it requires taking action. And different platforms can have different rules. As Senator Klobuchar said, there will be virtue in consistency. First of all, I think the step one is there's virtue in doing something and for seeing companies take action. Oftentimes to remove content, if it's fraudulent, if it's deceptive, if it is seeking to deceive people as to who said what, when, and where, or in other cases it may involve relabeling so the public is informed. But in every instance, I think it's critical that companies do something. The fourth is really around collaboration. We need to work together. And from my perspective, one of the real milestones in 2024 came at the Munich Security Conference this February, when 20 tech companies came together And we resolved together that we would take action. The action really reflects those first three pillars: with stronger architecture, with stronger protection of provenance and watermarking, with stronger work to protect our platforms. But clearly, the opportunity for collaboration in many ways is still in its infancy. The fourth really involves legislation. One of the things we decided early in the year is that we wanted to think hard. We wanted to put our teams to work. A lot of this has involved work with BSA, trade associations, others, to just canvass all of the great work that is taking place, not only in the United States, but in the European Union, where the EU in many ways has been ahead of the United States in taking action. But think about the kinds of opportunities that would exist for stronger laws here in the United States. And we said we wanted to take a moment in between the two political conventions to share what we think are some of the most exciting ideas. That is what led to the publication of this white paper that has 10 different ideas that we think hold merit, especially here in Washington, D.C., but also at states across the country. And then the last thing I'll highlight is the importance of public awareness and education. If anything, I think this has given me more cause for optimism than I would have predicted when the year began, especially in the context of elections. Because as a company, we've had the opportunity to participate in the Taiwanese elections, in the Indian elections, in the EU parliamentary elections. In fact, we've gone out, we have done training, more than 120 training sessions for almost 3,500 candidates and campaigns in 20 nations around the world. And as we interact with more people, we've combined that support for candidates and campaigns with public awareness efforts. Interestingly, there were a lot of deep fakes in the Taiwanese election, but none of them really deceived the Taiwanese public because people were prepared, they were aware, they were sophisticated. That led us in Europe to launch our own equivalent of a public service announcement, an advertising campaign, all about encouraging people to check, recheck, and then vote. In other words, think before one just accepts what one sees. And having seen the success of that in Europe, we're now repeating that in the United States. We took it to the Republican National Convention in Milwaukee. We'll take it to the Democratic National Convention in Chicago, and we'll take it to the American public as this election unfolds. I think it's a fundamental part of what we all can help do. So I'd like to spend the last few minutes to highlight the opportunities for legislation. As we think about it, they fall into fundamentally three categories. First, the need to protect our elections. I think Senator Klobuchar, who's been such a champion of this for so long, captured it well. We cannot take the protection of our elections for granted. I suspect we'll talk about this a little bit on the panel, because in January, the state of media coverage was really at the edge of the chair, waiting for the sky to fall. Now it's the end of July. The sky has not yet fallen. It is too easy for people to think that the clouds have passed, when in fact, the clouds haven't yet arisen overhead. They never do until the last days, weeks, or a month of an election. Second, we need to do more to protect seniors and consumers from online fraud. Unfortunately, computing resources in general, always flow to where there is an opportunity for people to make money, whether it's good people or bad. And so as people identify ways they can use this new technology to separate others from their money, that is what people will do. And we need to focus legislation in this area as well. And finally, we need to step up and do more to protect women and children from online exploitation. This is the next generation of CSAM, child sexual abuse material. It is the next generation of NCII, non-consensual intimate imagery. And in Europe, if there's one thing that to me is more disturbing than anything else, It's to see the disproportionate use of this technology or just online platforms overall to attack women who are holding office or are political candidates. And this is a disease, a new disease afflicting the democracies of the world. And we've seen European women political leaders have to deal with it. We have to be alert, and we have to take action to protect the democracies of the world from this new threat. Now, there's 10 ideas in our paper. I just want to close by highlighting 3. The first is we believe that there should be enacted a new federal deepfake fraud statute. The other thing that I think gives me the most hope is what was passed in 2010, the Truth in Caller ID law. It's a fascinating thing when you think about it. Just think, every single day, every one of us picks up our phone, sees someone calling or a text message. And when you see someone's name, you assume it's true. And that's not just because of technology advances. It's because of this law that was passed in 2010 that criminalized efforts to use or create a fraudulent caller ID. That is encouraging. It already applies to voice, and the FCC has made that clear. We commend them for doing that, but we can apply it not just to voice, but to video, to text, and we can do it to expand federal and state enforcement authority across the board. We should. And if we can get this done quickly, it may do more than anything else to slow what would otherwise be the pace of this kind of harmful activity on the internet. The second thing we should do is require AI system providers to use state-of-the-art provenance tooling to label synthetic content. All of the companies that signed the Tech Accord have committed to do this. But there are some companies, even important companies, that have not yet done this. We need a law to make this a practice that applies across the industry, both to protect the public and, frankly, to help platforms police content, because it's far easier to identify content when everybody is having to use these kinds of controls. Finally, we need to update our laws on child sexual exploitation and abuse, our laws on non-consensual intimate imagery. They need to be updated to include AI-generated content. We need to have laws protect against this. We need, as all of the state attorneys generals have called for, a new expert commission to help us identify additional steps. We need to take new action in the industry, and we're going to need new other additional legislation to follow, much of which is pending in Congress already, as you heard from Senator Klobuchar. And then I will just say this: no one can be effective by themselves. No company, no industry, no government, no NGO. But if we work together, if we pool our resources, as we have for years at Microsoft with our digital crimes unit, if we help pass strong laws, if we help educate the public, if we put stronger technology guardrails in place, if we stand together, we're not going to get to heaven, despite what Senator Klobuchar hoped, but we sure as heck can avoid hell. And that is a lot better than going south. So thank you. We look forward to this conversation, hopefully the passage of new laws, and most importantly, the opportunity to work together. Thank you.
Powerful, sobering. Thank you very much for being with us. Yes. Thank you all for being here. We welcome all of you. Brad, you have been introduced, and I think as a way just to begin the conversation for about a half a minute, and Representative Lee, we'll begin with you. Native of Burke, Virginia, Air Force brat, University of South Florida graduate, representative. Why you're here, what brings this issue to the forefront for you?
So there are a couple of things in my professional background that really bring me here today. My background is in law, but specifically, I spent many years as a federal prosecutor in the Tampa area and had the opportunity while there to work on cases and prosecutions involving the sexual exploitation of children. And it was really through that work that I began to understand the use of the internet by criminals and in the ways in which they could exploit emerging technology to inflict great harm upon the children of our country. And so I subsequently went on to be a judge and then later was Florida's Secretary of State. And in that role was responsible for being our state's chief elections official. So there I became very familiar with some of the challenges affecting elections, including but not limited to deepfakes and disinformation and misinformation in the context of elections work. So today I'm in Congress, and I serve on the Judiciary Committee, the Homeland Security Committee, and the Committee on House Administrations, where I chair the Elections Subcommittee. So I've had the opportunity in my current role to continue this work, take a look at things, places where we might need legislation. I'm currently also serving on the AI task force for Speaker Johnson. So all of these things are still very much a part of my professional life and what my staff and I are working on together.
Michelle DeLaune, you are on the forefront of all of this with the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, President and CEO. Just spend a half a minute on what you want to bring to the conversation today.
Well, thank you, and thank you so much for the invitation, Microsoft, to participate in this. The National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, which has been mentioned earlier, it's our 40-year anniversary. We're the nation's clearinghouse on issues related to missing and exploited children. We operate the cyber tip line for the last 25 years that actually intakes information regarding reports of child sexual exploitation, most of it occurring online. We've been working very closely with the tech industry for 2 decades in combating child sexual exploitation, and I believe what we have to offer today are real descriptions and real-life cases of children who are being harmed with AI technology.
And of course, the intersection of all of this is your expertise at democracy and technology. Alexandra Givens is the president of the center. Your thoughts about this issue and what you want to see happen.
Yes, thank you so much for the invitation. So at CDT, we work to make sure that technology protects people's rights and advances our democracy. And we do that by thinking about legislative interventions, advocating directly to companies for responsible design and use practices, and then also working in places like standards bodies and other places where we can normalize and elevate best practices. We do that work specifically on elections. We do a body of work actually in partnership with BPC and other allies in this space, where we think not only about what the tech companies should be doing, but how we resource election officials to respond to this moment, and how we boost trusted validators like AARP, which was mentioned already, other community organizations, to educate people about the risks and think about mitigations. And then similarly, the work on NCII. So there we actually lead a working group of different companies, different groups representing impacted survivors to think about what more interventions can be developed, what companies can do in this moment.
So thank you all for being here. Thank you for the stakeholders who are here, and let's begin the conversation. Brad, I want to conclude where you began because the report is sobering, eye-opening. It is a warning. You mentioned the cloud metaphor. Are there looming storms when it comes to election security, and what worries you the most about 2024?
Well, the obvious is that the worst hasn't yet arrived, because the best way to use technology or disinformation of any type to disrupt an election is at the very end. And the thing we do through our Threat Analysis Center is especially monitor the activities of foreign governments. And we see 3 that are active right now. We are seeing Russia, Iran, and China. I think that it's apparent at this stage that the Russians and Iranians each have decided they have a vested interest in influencing the outcome in opposite directions. It's not yet clear that China has made such a decision, but they're certainly interested in accessing information about what each party and campaign has to think about the future of government policy with China. The one election that one can say came closest to being changed with, in that case, Russian efforts, was in late 2023. It was in Slovakia. And the information was put out in the 48 hours before the vote itself. And there is a blackout period under the election rules in Slovakia. But if you think about it, Yeah, that's the smart time. Yeah, it is just before people vote. Don't do something in July. By October or November, people will understand what happened. And so we need to be prepared. We're working with both campaigns, both political parties and others more broadly. And I think calls on all of us in the tech sector to try to ensure our tools are not used, that we share information and take approaches on our platforms. But I think the most important thing, really by far, in the United States for the next several months is to just have a public conversation so that if something does happen, the American public will be a little bit more like, say, the Taiwanese public, prepared to think twice if this enters the scene.
And Congresswoman, you're working on legislation. There's not clearly a one-size-fits-all when it comes to the bill, but there are bills that are moving through states. Are there lessons that we can apply to the state laws that you can use here in Washington?
Well, sure, and I think Brad's absolutely right that when this does happen, it's likely to be on or near Election Day, and I know that's what we saw in Florida. We saw an increase in efforts in 2020 right around Election Day, either to provide incorrect information about precincts and voting sites, or in one case it was actually a foreign government sending out emails purporting to threaten some of our voters, and so it is important to be talking now to the public about the kinds of things that can happen, and I do think that's how we get to a place more like the Taiwanese that Brad discussed, and I think federally we have an important role in helping provide best practices and other support and resources for the states. Even though the state will have principal responsibility for conducting the election, we can still serve as a resource, and we can still be essentially a clearinghouse. And that's one of the things we've been working on doing, is ensuring that a state who wants to turn to, of course, I love using Florida as an example. In 2020, we had great elections. We weren't always known for having smooth, problem-free elections in Florida.
Hanging chads.
So we were very proud of our 2020 election, but we want to help other states with understanding what are some of the policies that work, what are some of the security, physical and cyber, so that we can make sure that every state in the country can have those kind of trouble-free elections.
This report is excellent, and by the way, you all have a copy of it. I want to ask you, how many of you, by the way, are parents? So what was most striking to me, in 2022, 32 million reports of child sexual abuse. 32 million. So this is a whole new area that parents have to be concerned about.
Thank you. Yes, and last year it was 36 million reports of child sexual exploitation. Now, moving into the AI realm, of the reports that we received last year, it was only about 5,000 reports we received. We'd say that would be the floor of what we knew to be AI. And the types of reports that were coming in, I just want to explain, because I know when we talk about child sexual abuse material, it's very hypothetical, because hopefully nobody's really looking at that. The way that we have actually seen these coming in, 4 different ways. One, individuals who are using AI technology, Gen AI technology, to generate new child sexual abuse material. We receive the reports from the tech companies, and they oftentimes report to us what exact prompts the person was using to create the material. So for 3 cases, a naked 6-year-old child, public orgy. Another person was trying to create the material, a 15-year-old boy having sex with a kindergarten girl. These are actual cases that companies who are putting guardrails around this, to your point of the importance of guardrails, were able to detect before their system actually created it. We have individuals who are now using this technology to create tutorials and guides on how to molest children. One example, I want to steal a little girl and blank and kill her. Please help me find one in 57 lines. And we have multiple cases of these. We also have individuals who historically have been sexual abuse victims and known child sexual abuse material, or there are offenders out there now who are creating new material or adding pictures of their own children onto those faces, or children that they know. And lastly, one that we just saw a few weeks ago that really caught our attention, we've been talking a lot about sextortion, where particularly young teenage boys are being targeted, asked for a sexually inappropriate photo, explicit photo, and then immediately blackmailed. Well, we received a report from a young boy who indicated that somebody had actually created AI-generated image of himself. And he said The images look scary real. There's even a video of me discussing things that look scary real. I don't know how the person managed to make them look that real, but I ended up sending them my debit card information. So we have a whole new way of even children that we're trying to prevent from engaging, falling for the sextortion plots. Now you have people who are just creating new material. So it's thrown accelerant on a problem. I know that we're on the early side. If I said 5,000 reports last year, we're expecting it to become more and more difficult to tell what's real and what's not.
So how do you strike the balance to ensure that we don't get to hell and might approach heaven? Because you're really, as I said at the outset, at that intersection of ensuring that there is, fundamental rights, civil liberties, but of course all of this is just horrible.
It's absolutely horrible. And here in the space where we're talking about AI-generated images, there are steps that companies can take to try and ensure that their tools aren't misused and abused in this way. And that's some of the really important work that's happening now. So how do the creators of generative AI tools train their models to make sure that they're rejecting those prompts, they're not responding to them, that even if someone hacks around the system, the model is trained in such a way that it filters out any outputs that do generate nude images? And what more can they do to make sure that there are reporting mechanisms when there is that type of inquiry being made? That's an area that I think is really ripe for development now. There are important pieces in the Microsoft recommendation about what legal steps actually could help companies train for that better now. We're in this unusual situation where there's strict limitations on child sexual abuse material actually make it hard to train models to detect and prevent the creation of that technology. So there's some work that we can do there to make that infrastructure at the companies even more robust to ensure that their products aren't being used for these types of purposes.
And Brad, as you put it, it's a global problem, but also I would imagine some global solutions. So are there best practices that we can learn from other countries and the collaboration you have among the tech industry?
Well, I'd say two things. First, one of the good things about activities by either the tech sector or NGOs is that they're not defined by borders. So when we came together in Munich, it really was a global effort. The kinds of work that you just described, Alex, that is, I think, spreading very quickly globally. And industry standards can help a lot. I do think then, we can harness the power of what different governments are doing, to build more of an interoperable regulatory architecture. So the notion that every national law, for example, might require that the developers and disseminators of these tools incorporate this kind of architecture. Having that kind of consistent standard from Europe across North America to Asia and beyond. I think those kinds of things help a lot. I think that the thorniest question is typically how to expect platforms to act. Because free expression is one of the vital principles that is especially relevant in the context of elections. Free expression as a legal concept varies. The US is really at one end of the spectrum of making this a constitutional pillar. Europe has more restrictions. But I think even there, to me, what is interesting about deep fakes is, in my view, it's fundamentally not about giving people the ability to speak. They can say whatever they want. But don't put words into your mouth that you never said. That's what we're trying to stop from happening.
Because we saw that in New Hampshire with the Joe Biden ad that aired in New Hampshire, and Senator Klobuchar made reference to it, but that was really just the very early iteration of what is on the forefront.
And to me, what's so interesting about that is, first, it was caught quickly. Second, it was widely reported. Third, the FCC has taken legal action under the Truth and Caller ID Act. They've sued the individual who did that for $6 million. That should be enough to get somebody to stop pursuing that kind of activity. And so if we can pull on that thread and expand the deterrence that is needed under the law, not just to that kind of action in the context of an election, but in these other categories, I think we do need the power of law and the help of law enforcement. Because I think we should recognize that if you just create a legal right but leave it to individuals to enforce it, you're fundamentally creating something that only someone with means who can afford a lawyer can go take action. And we do need law enforcement's involvement as well.
That example also speaks to why we really have to think about the full ecosystem. So when people tell me, what are the things that you worry about most as we approach this elections, there's a well-known election expert, I think actually is in the audience, Katie Harbath, whose mantra is panic responsibly, which I think is a very useful thing. I worry less about the fakes of President Biden calling, because when it is a well-known public figure, it is easy for them to debunk it, right? We need to do things about it. It's important that those instances are caught. But what I worry about is a manipulated image that comes out rapidly after the election that purports to show somebody messing with the ballot box, right? At a time when we already know that our society is primed, and there are some people who are poised to capitalize on that and try and stoke concerns about the administration of our election, how easy it is for that to add new layers of chaos to the ecosystem. And when you think about that, the intervention cannot just be, we do something about manipulated images. It needs to also think about how do we build more integrity in our electoral processes so that there is more robust support. So that's why we spend a lot of time with election officials, having them anticipate these concerns, having them build trust with local journalists and others so they can quickly debunk those rumors, and why we advocate for things like national auditing standards for elections, other ways that we can build trust in the system at a time when trust is going to be undermined no matter what controls we put in place.
And if I could, because I think the importance of that last point cannot be overstated. As we size up the threat landscape, we think that the Russians and Iranians have different candidates that they'd like to see win, but they share in common an interest in undermining American confidence
Disruption.
in the result. And if you just think about our recent history, because anybody who unfortunately is smart is going to take advantage of recent history, they may do their most vociferous work after all the ballots have been cast, but before every ballot has been counted.
And I thought the way you framed it, that this is nothing new, wire fraud and mail fraud and the rest. So let's turn to legislation. And I know Senator Klobuchar joked about it, but it's an issue that will unite Josh Hawley and Ted Cruz and Amy Klobuchar and Chris Coons. So talk about the bipartisan nature of the legislation, including the Report Act, and what Congress needs to do next.
Yes, well, I will tell you, this is one of the things that is so wonderful to see, in a world where we see so much focus on the things that divide us and the policy issues about which there is not broad agreement. One thing that can give you a ray of hope here is that absolutely in Congress, I think there is very, very broad support for many of the things that we have discussed here today, particularly those that relate to protecting children from abuses online and otherwise. So the Report Act, I was privileged to get to work on this bill, to lead this bill in the House, related to modernizing statutes, just like we've been talking about here today. We already had requirements for tech companies to report images of children, sexually explicit images of children, so that law enforcement could investigate those crimes. But what we saw was that there was a gap, that certain materials related to exploitation and trafficking didn't neatly fall within the existing statute. So the Report Act expanded those definitions to be sure that we included those broader materials, that those too needed to be reported to law enforcement. And second, that they needed to be retained for a longer period, so that when law enforcement went to build an investigation and bring a prosecution, the evidence that they needed would still exist. It was a bipartisan bill. It passed unanimously out of the Judiciary Committee, and not everything does. So for us,
Really?
So it was a great thing to see where we can work across the aisle and where we can build that kind of momentum and support. I think it really helps first actually get some legislating done. It increases the likelihood that a bill is going to pass, that it will pass easily. But it's also such a great message for America that when it comes to certain issues, that there is broad support and there is this great consensus in Congress that we share.
So that's the legislative side of it, but the victims in all of this, the children, the families, how do we address that?
Well, great question. Just another thing, your leadership was incredibly appreciated on Report Act. Thank you so much. And one of the other features of the bill, or the law now, is that the companies who make reports of child sexual abuse material are able to retain it. And as mentioned in the white paper, that companies would then be able to utilize that to train. So there are so many things on the front end, as you mentioned, Alexandra, that the companies can be doing building tech responsibly that can avoid many of what we just heard there, the examples. But in terms of supporting the families, there are lacking laws on the state level to give remedies, both criminal and civil, to families, to prosecutors, to law enforcement, to be able to react. There's such an uptick now in the Notify apps that are out there, where you have, teens and adults, but let's talk about teens who are making sexually explicit content of girls in their school, and then being able to distribute that. And many times, law enforcement, prosecutors don't have anything that they're able to do for that family.
Why?
Because in many cases, it may not meet the child pornography statute. It's an exploitative image that is not covered. There are some present bills that have been moving that Senator Klobuchar also mentioned that would allow for exploitative images that are being distributed with the intent to harass, shame, would actually be covered. But we're not there yet. So there is a lot of movement that still needs to happen on the state level. On the federal level, there's a little uncertainty whether the federal child pornography statute will be able to support any of the AI. We're going to be tracking that also. But so many of these cases are happening on the state level, and families need help.
So how does this all support what you're trying to do?
Well, it supports what we're trying to do by giving families not only on the education for schools, for parents, and for kids regarding the harms. I think now we have not seen any training or prevention regarding AI, generative AI, and how it's being misused. We are not under the illusion that a 14-year-old boy is necessarily thinking through the consequences of what he's doing when he's creating this type of material, the harm that it brings to the victim, potential legal consequences, certainly the disruption in the school. So we're trying to very much look at the prevention aspect with the families, but you need to have some sort of legal framework for prosecutors to be able to make their decisions.
And I think there's an interesting point, and it's such a good one, that you really do need a multifaceted approach. And the more one can prevent this, the better.
Of course.
And it's going to require more work in our schools to help educate kids as they're growing up. I think the point you made, when I think about how to stop people from being cruel, there are people that are intentionally cruel, and there are people who are thoughtlessly cruel. And we should hope we can at least make a dent in the latter group.
Yes.
So that people think before they do things, and we establish a broader norm among our kids across the country, and then adults, of course, as well. But the other dimension in terms of helping victims is it's giving them legal rights. But I actually think that, unfortunately, this is going to be another nuance to mental health assistance that people need to help recover from these kinds of incidents. And you're right, it's not just the individual, it's the family, it's the parents. And so we need to get this, it's like every problem, if it's back in the closet or hidden in the shadows, we won't do enough. So part of what we're trying to do, and where you all are so important, and it's where Representative Lee has done so much, we need to make this part of a broader public conversation.
And as you pointed out, the first deepfake was 2017. So we're at the very early stages, the infancy of this problem. What do you think are the biggest looming hurdles in the short term, the next 3 to 5 years?
I think people get distracted, and we need to stay focused on these issues. I mean, there is some very low-hanging fruit in our space. Things that the companies could be doing now, that, Brad, you alluded to this in your opening remarks, that some are doing, but everybody actually could be doing more easily. You think about remedies and access for victims. Right now, for example, some companies have very good mechanisms if there is a non-consensual intimate imagery of you circulating, but not everybody has that as a good mechanism. It is not as user-friendly as and easy as it could be, and that's an easy area where we could make progress. So there's some really basic kind of steps like that where we could be making progress now. And one of the things that I think about as an advocate, this goes to the point you were making, Brad, is people say, well, you take it out of the app store, someone's going to easily go find that Notify app out on the open web. And the answer is yes, maybe. We're not going to be able to stop every bad actor under the sun. But if we make it harder for people to access these tools, if we create those additional hurdles, and we make it easier for victims to get redress and to have their problem addressed quickly and know that companies are being responsive to what they're asking them to do. Get a report when you file your request for something to be taken down. Know that it's been actioned on a quick timeline. Those are some really easy things that we could action now. And by doing that, I think that's how we get the momentum for onward change. Otherwise, I worry, we spend so much time talking about AI and its existential risks, the national security concerns. Those are very real, and we need to focus on those. But it cannot be at the expense of these present harms now. And so my biggest thing is the attention deficit and how we make sure we're resourcing all of these issues at once.
And again, Congresswoman, prefacing that all of the material that we were talking about is horrible, but the part of the debate is privacy, First Amendment, and civil rights. So how do you navigate that in Congress?
Well, I do think that is absolutely one of the issues that we have to grapple with is, identifying there is some content that, as much as it may be inexplicable to many of us, is First Amendment expression. But I think it's clear that what we're really talking about here today in so many ways crosses that line and becomes criminal behavior, or what should be criminal behavior. When we're, as a mother, I'm still over here. I didn't realize there was such a thing as a Nudify app, and as a mother, I am utterly horrified. Criminals are incredibly creative, and unfortunately, they have an extraordinary capacity for staying at the cutting edge of technology to think of new ways, whether it's exploiting the elderly, harming children. And so, it's incumbent upon us to be perpetually looking at what do our current laws do? Where do they fall short? What do we need to add? But certainly one of our obligations, and we're very careful when we have these hearings in Congress, to hear from the perspective of those who work in the civil liberties space, to hear the discussion about, is there something here that we need to be sure we don't overlook? That and clearly when we talk about the exploitation of children and the defrauding of the elderly, we're not in that area. Mm-hmm. But in some of the more banal use cases of artificial intelligence that we may be using in commerce or business or other things that don't clearly cross that line, we're always very mindful of ensuring that we are cognizant of freedoms and liberties and constitutionally protected expression.
We had a chance to talk earlier, and you have been at the center for more than 2 decades. So in the arc of your career, it seems like right now, where we're at is the biggest challenge that you're facing with children.
We have seen interest, and you mentioned it, Brad, also, people do bad things, and they always have, and they'll use technology to do bad things. We've been seeing, people use morphing photos over the year. I think what's the concerning part now is the just rapid availability and ease of use, that it's incredibly powerful technology, important technology, but incredibly powerful technology in the hands of young people who don't necessarily think through the consequences. One of the recommendations also that you had mentioned about the watermarking, really critical, because a challenge that's facing law enforcement now, you have children who are being sexually abused in imagery that law enforcement wants to find the child. Where in the world is that child located? If you now throw in another monkey wrench of, is this really a child, is it not? Having some way to be able to identify the synthetic from the real imagery is very important, because otherwise children will, in real life, continue being harmed because law enforcement doesn't know what to prioritize.
The other thing I would just say is, I think you can build on that and think about the course of technology development and how we're at different stages really with respect to images, audio, and video. If you think about computer-generated images or computer-edited images, that has been around since Photoshop. What generative AI has perhaps done more than anything is make it very easy for people to harness the power of that technology capability by writing in prompts. Right. I don't have to learn how to use the program. I don't have to be an expert. I just need to have a tool and tell it what to do. And so we'll see that continue, and then the quality of the images will continue to improve. Audio has now entered the scene because it was not easy in the past to basically use a computer program to fake your voice and then tell it what to say. That is both easy, effective, high quality, and cheap. Video is, unfortunately or fortunately, depending on the scenario, where for the good and the bad, it's where the future is going. And you're just starting to see AI models advance to the point where they're capable of people using prompts to create video. But the thing about video that's different from images and audio is it's very computationally intensive. It requires a lot of computing power, the use of GPUs, a significant number of GPUs for some sustained period of time to create those videos. If you ask 3 to 5 years from now, what will things look like? One should expect that to be easier. Either the cost of the computing will come down or the computing itself will be optimized so it's not as intensive. So then if you just step back and look at where social media has gone, the last few years, everything's gone to video. It's what the Russians have figured out. If you want to disrupt an election in 2024, now you use video if you want to do that. So this will unfortunately go to video. And so the challenge is real today. It's going to become more multifaceted and in some ways even more challenging in the future.
Which is my next question, but did you take the test, by the way? Did you get 60%?
I got about 52. I could have just said yes on everything and been at 50 probably.
So for each one of you, and I'll begin with you, a specific policy solution, recommendation, either from the private sector or from Congress, what would it be?
There are so many different directions to go with that question, but I'm going to focus on immediate wins in the near term. Congress should pass the Defiance Act. It's out of the Senate, it's in the House's hands. I think it's a really good common sense early step on NCII.
Will that happen?
Well, let's see. What happens in Congress for the next few months is going to be, we're all interested in seeing what we're able to work on. But I can say, as I touched on earlier, I do think that this is a particular subject where there's very broad interest and very bipartisan interest in making sure that we're doing the things we need to do in the short term to be addressing the challenges that AI brings, and particularly those related to children. One thing, the AI task force that I mentioned that I get to serve, this too is a group that the speaker put together with the intention of having us really take in the landscape of artificial intelligence and what it is that we as lawmakers need to be thinking about. And so we're devoting, each week we have a new hearing, we hear from an expert in a different field, and our task is to create by the end of the year a report that really makes an effort to set out that landscape and then send back to the various committees of jurisdiction the subject matter areas that we think they need to be working on. Now, in tandem to the work of that task force, we've seen a lot of legislation already in progress, some of it coming out of the Senate, some of it that's been filed in the House, and I absolutely think there is a desire to take up and start the process of addressing some of these issues in the near term.
Michelle, one recommendation, there's a lot here, but if there's one priority.
Well, speaking to legislative fixes, yes, but I think getting the tech companies who are building these models and the companies who are building the Gen AI tools that are being distributed very, very quickly to actually build in the guardrails. They need clean data sets. If you're training a model, you should not have child sexual abuse material in it, which has happened before. It needs to be clean. You need to be able to use signals and indicators. Use a known hash set to know that those images, if somebody is uploading content in some of the examples that I gave, if it's a known child sexual abuse material, your system should be kicking it out. The cases that I had are from companies that are actually doing that work. So many of them are not. So I believe on the front end, while we have prevention, we have legislation, getting the tech companies before more things go out to market to start thinking about the bad ways things are going to be used would be very beneficial.
I'm going to come to you in a minute, but let me just follow up on that point, because if you've played the arcade game Whack-A-Mole, you get one, another one pops up. So how, with technology changing at such a rapid clip, do you have a handle on all of this?
I feel like it would make a difference. I mean, certainly, you're not going to be able to get every single company to do everything. We haven't done that yet, but we've still made a pretty significant impact on child sexual abuse. So you start with the companies and you build the coalitions to do more. The tools are out there. The parties are out there who wish to partner with them, but there needs to be the will.
We're going to get a couple of questions from the audience. We're going to give you the last word on policy issues.
You saw my favorite three, but my favorite one would be really asking Congress to pass a deep fake fraud statute. I think these other ideas are critical as well. But it would do more than anything, I think, to encompass all three forms: imagery, audio, video. It would harness the power of federal agencies. It would give authority to the state attorneys general. But the other reason I like it is I just always find with any of these issues, the public conversation is critical to generate momentum that one can then build on for further action. And when I think about it, it always helps to start with something that is familiar to everyone. So what is familiar to everyone? Caller ID. You know, we all rely on it. And it's actually, I think, an interesting example of where a federal law made a difference. It's not something that is part of everyday life. People actually successfully scamming us and putting in a fake ID for text or phone calls. And so if we can use that as the model, which it is, expand it, but then engage people, and then the need to think about this and do more, then I think it helps unleash further steps.
Each of you will have a chance to answer the final question, which is, how do we get there? So think about that. We have a couple of questions from the audience. Where is Rachel? I think she has the first question.
Hi, everyone. My name is Rachel Ori, and I'm director of the Elections Project here at the Bipartisan Policy Center. So one of the challenges of widespread generative AI is that voters might just distrust everything. Say, I don't know what's real, so I'm going to throw up my hands and not trust any information that I see. So how do we, as policymakers, as election officials, as media and civil society and journalists, make sure that voters aren't only connected to trustworthy information, but that they know they can trust it?
Big question. Let me turn to you, Congresswoman.
Sure. So one of the messages that we spent the most time trying to convey to the public was that of relying on trusted sources. And in the context of elections, by that we meant your local elections official, your Secretary of State, the people who are actually responsible for setting up your precinct, making sure that the ballots are there. And so we would just time and again say, of course, don't ask your neighbor where to vote, or if the times for your voting were changed. Go to your supervisor of election, go to your Secretary of State. And so, I think when it comes to elections specifically, that is when we spoke in unity, when we have local, state, and federal leaders in the world of elections all sending that same message, I think that was really effective, and it's something that I know that around the country they're going to be going back to this season as well to try to really encourage the public to go to the official sources for information, because that is one of the places that we see those who want to be disruptive will try to interfere in that way. Oh, your precinct is closed. Oh, voting got moved to Monday instead of Tuesday, those sorts of things. So getting back to the actual trusted, elected human in your community that you know and can rely on is so important.
And if I may, this is an area where the tech companies really can have an outsized influence, just given the important role they play in our information environment today. So that's the social media platforms, surfacing that information through voter information centers. But it's also the generative AI companies as they increasingly integrate kind of search services into their functionality. There's a news website, Proof News, that recently did a study of the 5 leading generative AI companies, and they had a panel of election experts put in inquiries about, where's my polling location? Can I wear, a Biden campaign hat to my polling location? Is it going to be accessible? And 40% of the answers were wrong. And that's today. So it just tells you, but it's an easy place for mitigations, right? So there have been good partnerships to instead make sure that those tools are kicking out to trusted sources of information, or scaffolding people so that they know what information they can trust, which is just a crucial step at this time.
Yeah, and I think really building on that, it's why it's so important that we get tech companies and then all the creators of genuine content to use these tools and use the right type of watermarking. And then, frankly, we need to help the public and make it easier for the public to know when something is genuine. But that's why you're seeing news organizations start to adopt C2PA. It's why every piece of video that the Republican National Committee put out from the convention in Milwaukee was watermarked. And so I think the more we get everybody on board, I think that will help create more trustworthy sources of content.
Another question from the audience. Who has the microphone? Yeah, right up here. Yeah, thank you.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is John Rigi. I'm the National Advisor for Cyber and Risk for the American Hospital Association. I'm also retired from the FBI after 28 years of service, including in the cyber division. First, thank you. Thank you from the American Hospital Association for your efforts today, really on this extremely important issue. As this threat advances and the AI technologies and the bad guys' capability to use this technology advanced, including the use of Microsoft's technology, and it's really outpacing the government's ability to mitigate this threat through effective law enforcement, policy, and legislative action. Yet, as we see in other criminal and national security threats, we know that legislative and policy options alone will not fully mitigate this threat. So it's clear that we need not just a whole of government approach, but really a collective whole of nation approach. As the American Hospital Association worked with Microsoft, the White House, and other cyber firms to bring discounted and free cyber services for rural hospitals in need. So again, great example of folks filling the need where the government wasn't able to, and so we thank you for your support there. Question: how will Microsoft stay engaged with law enforcement, policymakers, and the public to contribute your collective expertise to help reduce the threat and impact of abusive AI-generated content?
Thank you for that, because as you pointed out, it's public-private, it's got to be collaborative.
Two things. I mean, first is it is, I think, calling for ongoing investment by tech companies to partner with, I'll just say, parts of society that are especially important and in some cases may be especially challenged, including economically challenged, to address the ongoing set of technology threats. And give credit where credit is due. I mean, I got a phone call from the White House 2 days after Christmas asking, could we do something to help hospitals? And I said, yes. I don't know what it is yet, but we'll figure it out. And Google got a similar call, and they jumped in as well. And I think what I've really learned from the work with AHA is just how vulnerable our rural hospitals are, especially hospitals with 25 beds or fewer, the small hospitals. And it's going to take more work and more collaboration to just build the technical resilience, and then use AI, frankly, to improve the delivery of healthcare in those hospitals. And it does take a whole of society approach. The second thing that I've been excited to see is with our digital crimes unit. Now, this is a unit that was founded more than 20 years ago, and as crime evolves, we've evolved the work of that effort. And so now we're making all the problems that we're talking about here a new focal point. And we can bring civil cases, and we sometimes do. We can use our ability to collect evidence, our partnership with NCMEC, with others. At times we take cases to law enforcement. Law enforcement brings the cases, but they can move a lot faster if we do the work to help prepare. And so I think those are just two examples, very concrete examples, of the kinds of partnership opportunities we have.
Well, and I'll just briefly add you a third, which is this. Our private partners were so important to us in the elections world as well. And Microsoft and your elections team was one of those partners. So, we have the whole of government approach of state, local, and federal law enforcement working together to secure. But we're all using tools and we're all using private partners to help us secure our physical and our cyber assets. And so the private sector, Microsoft and others, being willing to come and spend time with us and really assist in making sure that we were identifying the threat landscape and mitigating the risks confronting us was essential.
Let me thank you for your PowerPoint presentation. Thank you for this report. Before we let you all go, thank you all for being here to really provide such important context. And I want to give you each about a minute or so. Just how do we get there? And I want to begin with you because we are at the Bipartisan Policy Center. This seems to be a nonpartisan issue because it affects everyone, Democrat and Republican. How does Congress get there?
Well, I think what we're doing here today is really an example of how we get there. I think it is vital for us to be having conversations that include elected officials, that include our private sector partners, that include those of us from different political parties, because by being here today and hearing this conversation, it helps us understand what are the most essential next steps for us to take. It helps us develop the policy ideas that we'll be able to get across the finish line. So I really just commend everyone here who's participating, because I think this is how it's done, is by having the conversation, getting all of the people in the room, and developing the going forward plan.
Will we get there?
I certainly hope so. We're again, it's early on, but it's moving at warp speed. So having the conversation today has been very valuable. And by bringing together, again, I come from one harm. There are the election harms. There are so many wonderful, wonderful, good things for society with generative AI and with AI. But having an acknowledgement and a discussion about the harms that exist, about the clear mitigation strategies that could be in place, having the conversation so parents understand what they should be speaking with their children, having conversations with members of the public, what they should be looking for with elections, having this dialogue is something we weren't talking 2 years ago. Something from my 85-year-old mother to to the kids that we're speaking to now. Really talking about how this could impact people in positive and less than positive ways.
And part of that dialogue includes guardrails that you had brought up earlier. So let me give you a final thought.
Yeah, I think my takeaway is we get there when we think about across society's suite of solutions. There are legislative interventions, but as you were alluding to in an earlier conversation, in some of those issues, legislating is hard. The First Amendment makes things complicated. We have to get the balance right. But what we can do is think about those interventions and then think about what companies can be doing now, and there are very concrete things. We've articulated some of them today. How we empower victims and the groups that work with them to be empowered in this scenario and to fight for their rights and to report harms and have them addressed. And then how we help those trusted validators and voices in the community raise better awareness about this and help really drive this from an abstract conversation to a tangible conversation about what you can do to help people who are victimized by abuse. That's a way forward that I think we all can get behind and involves kind of all the different levers of power that we have at our disposal.
And Brad, let me conclude with you and say, first of all, thank you, because the country is better off with your leadership. Microsoft is leading the forefront in all of this. A lot of challenges ahead. There's going to be a lot that is not even expected today that will come to the table over the next couple of years. But how do we get to where you think we need to be?
Well, I think it's really a partnership, and I think we're there with many others. It's not anybody doing this alone. The key is getting started. The key is getting things done. The key is building a muscle that we keep calling on. I think one of the lessons of the last 20 years with digital content is you can never become complacent because the problem keeps changing, in part because the technology keeps changing, and in part because criminals figure out how to get around the safeguards you put in place. But if you come together with a resolve to start getting things done and keep getting things done, that's how we stay ahead of this. It's not going to go away.
Final follow-up. Are we at a better place today than we were maybe 8 months or a year ago when you began thinking about this white paper?
I absolutely think so. Thanks to a lot of people, including a lot of people in this room. This is a year where our deeds are starting to catch up with our words, and that's what we need to keep doing.
It has been a terrific conversation with all of you. Thank you for your perspective. Thank you all for being here on behalf of the Bipartisan Policy Center. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.